Good morning everybody, and welcome back to another weekly recap. Now this week, all of a sudden we have a ton of information to go over. It went from little trickles of quality of life changes, super minor updates, to all of a sudden dropping 3 giant blogs back to back to back. Anyway guys, let's get started. Alright, so to start off here, we're going to have a look at yesterday's game update, and it was titled Fishing Trawler Improvements and Equipment Rebalance. And to begin with here, there were some changes to Fishing Trawler, mainly to make it a little bit more streamlined, a bit quicker, and just overall a bit more playable. There are quite a few changes to Fishing Trawler, including the game time being halved. Previously it was 10 minutes and now it will be 5 minutes. And while they have made the angler outfit a bit rarer to compensate, overall the time to obtain the angler outfit is actually going down, so it's going to become quicker. There are also quite a few changes to how you actually interact with the event, mainly to make it more desirable to actually participate in the event instead of just getting the minimum required contribution and then going AFK. Now that the mission takes half the time to complete, you're also going to get twice as many chances at getting the heron pet. However, that will scale with your contribution, which means you will have to participate to get it. If you participated fully and have full contribution, you're going to find 50% more fish in your net, and the fish will also now give you 50% more fishing experience than before. And on top of that, fish caught during the game will also give you 50% more experience. So overall, for players who are paying attention, the activity has been buffed fairly significantly, not only in the pet chance, but also the experience rate, the time to obtain the angler outfit, and just major quality of life. So does that mean I'm going to go get the angler outfit now? Well, maybe not. Okay, so out of nowhere, yesterday we had the first round of changes to the equipment rebalance. These were the non-controversial changes and those that were less impactful on the overall meta of the game. For example, first up here we had med helms that had their ranged attack bonus increased from -1 to 0. That's from helms from bronze through to dragon. Now conversely, full helms have actually had their ranged attack stats reduced from -2 to -3, making them a little bit less desirable as a ranged helmet. Okay, so next up here we have plate legs and plate skirts, which have also had their ranged attack stat reduced from -7 to -11, once again making it less desirable for rangers. Continuing on with this trend, plate bodies have had their ranged attack stats reduced from -10 to -15, once again making it less desirable for rangers. Now similar to the med helm, square shields have actually had their ranged attack increased from -2 to 0, which might entice some players to maybe use it as a ranged offhand. Of course, to counter that, the kite shields have had their ranged attack reduced to -3. Alright, so next up here we have a few more interesting changes that will probably affect the overall meta a bit. Now first up here, all Warhammers are now going to require strength to wield instead of attack, including the Dragon Warhammer. However, do note that if you do happen to have a Dragon Warhammer equipped right now, and you can no longer wear it because of a pure account or you just don't have the strength requirement, it'll automatically go into your inventory. Failing that, it will go into your bank, and if your bank is full, it will drop it onto the ground. So do be aware of that. Now another interesting change is to maces. They've actually had their attack rate decreased from 5 to 4, which if you don't know, that actually has increased the actual attack speed. So those will be on par with most other meta weapons like scimitars or the whip. Same thing for hastas, they've had their attack speed reduced from 5 to 4, making them on par with most other weapons like scimitars. Alright, next up here we have the Twisted Bow. Now the Twisted Bow's actually had its prayer bonus stripped, so it used to have a +4 prayer bonus and now it has nothing. Overall, not a huge nerf and probably won't be that impactful or noticeable. Now finally, the Dragon Bone or Bone Crusher necklace has finally received a buff. All of the attack stats are going up from 0 to 10, putting it pretty much on par with an Amulet of Glory. The prayer requirement has been reduced from 80 down to 70, and on top of that, the prayer restoration effect will activate immediately, which means you no longer have to wait 10 seconds to actually put it on, which I'm actually very curious to see where players may actually take this. Is it actually going to be useful in any locations, or will it remain an incredibly niche item? Okay, and finally here, as of yesterday, the Basilisk Knight have actually lost their special attack. So the special attack that freezes you will no longer be on the regular Basilisk Knight, however on the superior Basilisk, they will actually retain it. Note that you can no longer break out of it just from auto retaliate, and you'll actually need to be paying attention for that. However, of course, superiors are not that common, which means for the most part, Basilisks have just been made quite a bit easier. I'm quite curious how they are going to be as a task going forward, and I'm looking forward to trying them out. And that's pretty much it for the first round of equipment rebalancing changes, and realistically that's a perfect segue into the next poll blog on the ranged meta equipment rebalance, which will be coming in the near future. Now, just a couple days ago, jagex released a very in-depth blog regarding the ranged equipment rebalance. Now, this is not a new proposal, however, one of those is in the works right now. It is essentially an incredibly in-depth and long look into the thought process behind, well, nerfing mainly the blowpipe, but also just shifting up the ranged meta. There are a lot of calculations, explanations, and generally just acknowledging people's concerns and acknowledging the suggestions that they have received. It's way too long to go through all today. Now, of course, I did read through all of it, and it is clear that jagex has put quite a bit of thought and time into putting out the blog, crunching the numbers, and generally trying to explain why they're making a nerf to the blowpipe in the most thorough way possible. This graph here does a pretty good job at illustrating why. Now we can see here that pretty much in all circumstances for the vast majority of monsters that can be killed with ranged, the blowpipe is either meta or incredibly strong. Unless there is a mechanic that prevents you from using the blowpipe for some reason, like requiring a shield slot, or they just have incredibly high defense, usually the blowpipe is a pretty good option. Now with the new proposal and somewhat with the last one, they want to retain the blowpipe still being a very strong weapon against low defense monsters, but that would be its new identity. For example, on the bottom here, they explain that in our eyes, a healthy meta would look something like this. Weapon A, being the blowpipe, would have 12 DPS against monsters with 0 defense and 4 DPS against monsters with 30,000 effective defense. Weapon B could be, for example, the armadillo crossbow, which would have 9 DPS against monsters with 0 defense, and maybe 6 DPS against monsters with 30,000 effective defense. And like I said, there is going to be a new proposal coming out soon. Now, if you do want to have your voice heard, at the end of this blog, there is actually a survey for you to fill out. The survey is just generally how you feel about rebalancing ranged equipment, what direction you'd like to see it go in. So I would recommend, if you do have an opinion, definitely fill out the survey. Also, the blog is very insightful, so I would recommend reading it all through, but if I did it today, this video would be like an hour long. So let's move on. And finally, here to finish us off for today, just a few hours ago, a new game improvement blog was released, poll number 75. We're going to quick fire through some of the more interesting changes in my opinion, because it is once again a massive blog. Now we're starting off here with a very interesting proposed change for the very first question. Would you like the ability to be able to actually store a Slayer task for later? This would actually be an ability that you would unlock with 1,000 Slayer points. After unlocking it, you'd be able to actually store the Slayer task for 50 Slayer points for later use. Definitely an interesting change, but I'm not really sure how popular that ability was when they were proposing the new boss Slayer Master, so I guess we'll have to see. Now next up here, there is a really interesting proposal for a rework of what the recolored Slayer helms actually look like. Right now it is simply a recolor, however, after making this change, they would also look a bit different structurally. Some of them would have horns, some of them would have little spikes, etc., to give them each a better identity. Now next up here, we have a few changes to Boss Slayer. First up here, they'd like to actually add in a new identifiable animation whenever the alchemical Hydra changes its attack style, so it would make it a little bit more intuitive to know which attack is coming next, because essentially right now you have to continuously count to 3, which can get a little bit tiresome. Also, they are considering adding in a bit more bonus experience to the Abyssal Sire. On top of the base experience you get for killing the Abyssal Sire, you'd also get 50 Slayer experience for each respirator that you take out during the encounter. Now, as far as regular Slayer monsters, there are a couple really popular ones that jagex was hoping to increase the population of. First up here, we have Bloodveld tasks, which specifically they'd like to increase the quantity of them within the God Wars dungeon. This is mainly for Konar Slayer because you sometimes will be assigned that dungeon specifically. And finally here, they'd like to add in actually more Dust Devils into a new dungeon in the Caridian Desert. You would only be able to kill these Dust Devils on a Slayer task to make them a bit less competitive. Now next up here, one agility shortcut that players have been asking for quite a while is actually one to the Skeletal Wyverns. This proposed agility shortcut would require 72 agility, however there would be no diary requirement for it. Now next up here, we have more changes to the Grotesque Guardian. Now one of the major changes they are going to be making is during the orb phase for the Grotesque Guardian. Previously there was some amount of unavoidable damage you would take, however with the changes, if you do absorb all of the orbs, you would actually take no damage. Now within the same tangent, there are going to be potentially more changes to the Corporeal Beast. Now because the current meta for killing the Corporeal Beast involves the player-owned host, there's a lot of downtime spent reducing the defenses on the Corporeal Beast. Now if you are a solo player, it is very easy to get crashed while you're doing this. Now to help fix this, they want to make the following change. Going forward, the Corporeal Beast would no longer reset to full health if there are no players within the cave. Instead, the Corporal Beast would quickly regenerate health, and after 3 minutes of downtime, it would eventually restore to full health. Now, I'm just going to very briefly go over some of the interesting changes for the Theater of Blood and the Chambers of Xeric. There are just a ton of quality of life changes here. I'm not going to go over all of them. Now, I wouldn't really call this a quality of life change, but one interesting change they want to make to Raids 1 is actually to increase the maximum potential uniques per raid. Right now it is capped at 3, but if the group size is large enough, they'd like to actually increase that up to 6. Now, one really interesting potential feature Jagex is considering adding is to the Theater of Blood, but it could be expanded elsewhere, I imagine. Now, this feature is mainly to add in a bit of extra safety for hardcore Ironman. If you were in a group in the Theater of Blood, and I presume you have Accept 8 on, they would like to allow your teammates the ability to trigger your teleport if, for example, you lose connection. So if you're doing Theater of Blood in a group and you're doing it with a hardcore Ironman and they for some reason disconnect, you'd be able to trigger a teleport of theirs and get them out of the room. It's an interesting idea, and I think they could port that idea to other group activities, so I thought it was interesting. Of course, there are a ton of quality of life changes here, but we are just going to be brief here and skip onwards. Now, one change that people have been asking for a long time is allowing the Skull Scepter the ability to auto-cast Crumble Undead, and this would actually be for both pay-to-play and free-to-play, giving it an extra use because it is a really interesting early game piece of free-to-play content. Now moving on here to Sarachnis, they were hoping to add in a recolor for both orange and blue. You'd get the recolor item from either the grubby chest or from Sarachnis itself. Now in poll number 40, we get an interesting insight to the new Kingdom Divided quest. With the launch of a Kingdom Divided, they want to add in a new item called the Ash Scatterer, which would work very similar to the Bone Crusher, just for ashes. Essentially, if you had it in your inventory, it would automatically scatter any demonic ashes dropped by any of your foes, awarding half of the normal prayer experience. You would charge it with actually death runes, and each death rune would give you 100 charges. And right now they're not sure exactly where this item would come from, but the highest level concept right now would be from Skatizo. And finally here at the bottom here, there's a few potential changes to some new content that has come out pretty recently. Now first up here we have the Tome of Water. Now the Tome of Water's release has been a bit lackluster. I'm not sure if too many people actually use this. So pretty much across the board they would be buffing up all of its effects from somewhere between 15% and 33%, which is a pretty notable buff. Will this make the Tome of Water useful? Hard to say for now, but there is a proposed buff on the way. And finally here we have Shooting Stars. Now they actually admit that they initially lowered the experience rate by about 20% for the initial launch of Shooting Stars. They've definitely been very conservative with how they're releasing content recently, which I suppose is better than releasing it busted and then fixing it a few years later. So right now they're actually looking to buff the experience rate from mining Shooting Stars by about 20%, but with a bias towards giving more experience in larger group sizes. And that is it for most of the notable changes in all of the content blogs we got this week. I know I definitely skipped over some things, but to keep the update videos to a reasonable length, I think it was necessary this week. Anyway guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you did, always appreciate a like in the video. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time. Now before I go here, I'm going to give a massive thank you to all of my members over on YouTube. A huge thank you to Brian Robinson, Capi, Collin Corley, Timothy Chen, Guy Fox, Valhalla Lad, Ocelot, and Kush Patel for all being subscribed at the Dragon tier of YouTube membership. And just a big shout out to Ocelot and Kush Patel for 8 months now. Thank you guys so much. Also big thank you to Clakclak, Need More Pills, Branton Griffin, All Things Gaming, BirdBot, and Basstich for subscribing at the Runite tier. You guys are awesome. As always, if you guys are looking for another way to support the channel, becoming a YouTube member is an awesome way to do so. You will get immortalized in all of my future videos, get access to my video release schedule, and of course get a custom role in my Discord server. Thanks again guys, and I'll see you next time.